Hi, my name is Brandon Justice. I'm here to present my video essay for IT research for the University of Cincinnati and its master's program. I'm actually going to be covering self-driving cars, something that I think is a cool topic for me, but I also, in my research of doing this for another class, got really fascinated around the morals that are associated with self-driving cars, particularly in a situation where an accident can't be avoided and how the car should perform. So I want to give a little bit of background about self-driving cars because for some they may not be aware that it is something that's on the cusp of becoming mainstream. So who's making them? So currently traditional car manufacturers such as Ford, GM, Chrysler, Mercedes, all the big ones have announced some type of program or initiative to develop a self-driving car. So Ford actually has plans to have a car on the road with no steering wheel whatsoever by 2021. GM is actually currently testing 30 self-driving Bolts on the road in test cities such as San Francisco and in Scottsdale, Arizona. Fiat Chrysler has actually entered into an agreement with Google to build 100 self-driving Pacificas that Google will then use as test cars. Chrysler hopes that this business deal leads to a more lucrative relationship and helps them advance their self-driving car initiative. Now, Mercedes-Benz has actually already unveiled a self-driving car in 2015. It's very futuristic. If you haven't seen it, I would say definitely check it out. And it's currently actually testing other car models, such as the E-Series in Nevada, to gather more information on cars. The big one that they are a car manufacturer, but not many people may know of them, is Tesla. Tesla actually has currently two models that are offered to the public, the Model S and the Model X, which is an SUV, that have an autopilot mode feature available to consumers. This will assume all functions of the car. It does require the user to be engaged though, as in difficult situations, the car will actually kick control back to the driver and have them actually take control of the vehicle. Self-driving cars actually use a series of sensors and cameras to detect what's going on around them. So the car is trying to figure out where it is, what's around them, what will happen next, and what should it do. So you then uses algorithms to try to figure out what's the best course of action and will often cause the least amount of harm to either bystanders or the passenger inside that car. As one may assume, there is many benefits to one that I didn't really think of that after doing my research, I realized that it's a huge benefit is that it gives independence back to an aging, visually impaired, or handicapped drivers that may not have access to reliable transportation. A lot of times these people are forced to rely on public transit and or community services around them to get around, to make doctor's appointments, food services, that type of thing. Now, in rural counties, that may not even be available to them, so the burden solely falls on their friends and family to escort them around, and they kind of lose their independence for them. The big benefit to self-driving cars is actually the reduced amount of deaths that's expected to occur. The number has been anywhere from 90 to 94% around the amount of accidents it could eliminate. So keep in mind, 1.2 million people die every year from auto accidents. 94% of all those accidents involve some level of human error. So think about the mistakes that will be eliminated and the lives that will be saved. Now, there's also some potential issues to go along with those benefits. One is, will people use a self-driving car? In America particularly, we see that cars are typically marketed to be fun. You know, they want to be fun to drive. They want to be zippy. You enjoy that thrill of driving. So will customers adapt to it? Also, will customers be concerned about the safety of driverless cars? Also, what's the legal framework and the establishment of government regulations for self-driving cars? Will it be solely federal? Will it be state? Will it be local? And how will car manufacturers adapt to those regulations? Discuss is actually the ethical problems in situations where an autonomous car software is forced to make a decision in an unavoidable accident. So what does the car choose? To protect the passenger of the car, or does it choose to minimize harm to them? So there's no real right answer here, and a lot of times we turn to the trolley car problem to explain this. So the trolley happens when a crash can't be avoided. So Google actually uses something called risk magnitude to determine the situation and the maneuver of the car. This was actually revealed in a 2012 patent that Google had filed It details the 3 questions the cars will calculate before making such maneuvers. So, how much information is gained? What are the odds something bad will happen? And how bad would that be? So, Google then assigns point values to certain situations that could happen. So, like swiping a car would be a 5,000 points. A head-on crash would be 20,000. Hitting a pedestrian would be 100,000. So, in that situation, if the car had to choose between hitting a pedestrian and a head-on crash, the car would then conclude that the risk magnitude would be greater to hit the pedestrian, so it would swerve and hit the head-on car. So Mercedes-Benz is actually one of the few car companies that has already come out and said what they will do. They will always protect the driver. So they have gotten a little bit of backlash from that. I know from reading some tech blogs and things that I encounter in my daily life. They see it as a kind of just a way to protect your purchaser, not so much worrying about the moral obligation that you have society to contribute to the greater good. Now, everyone else has been kind of mum on it, and they really haven't said how their cars will perform, which will then lead to the discussion around the research that I personally have read and that is being conducted in the field of IT currently. So to greater understand the issue of what do you do in a situation where a crash is unavoidable, a lot of times you hear the Charlie car problem being brought up. The Charlie car problem is a philosophical thought experiment where the Charlie car problem is a philosophical thought experiment where a runaway trolley car is coming towards 5 people, and the only way to save those 5 people is to sacrifice one person. What do? It's an interesting dilemma because different people are going to have different answers to that, and there is no right answer. Currently, people developing software for self-driving cars are facing that dilemma. So there's actually a research done that I was able to find. It's called the social dilemma of autonomous vehicles. So it conducted 6 different surveys with a total of about 1,900 people, and it was given different situations, and people would rate how they would wish the car to perform in those situations. It's online surveys. Study 1 was actually asked the participants if they were the passenger of the car and they could save 10, would they agree that the car should save the 10 instead of them? 76% of the participants thought it would be morally correct to kill the driver over the 10 people, which I think most people would agree with that standard. And then the study then asked how should they be programmed. So on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 protecting the passenger, 100 minimizing casualties in the accident, the group overwhelmingly expressed a preference to minimize casualties, as again I agree most people would probably say. Study 2 continued along the same lines. This time it was an adjustable ratio from 1 to 100, where the participants chose if it was one pedestrian, should the car save you or the pedestrian? And that number was able to increase all the way to 100. So when the ratio was 1 to 1, actually only 23% approved of the decision of the car saving the pedestrian over the driver. Now, as that number went up, so did the decision to minimize casualties, which we see in study 1 as well. When it's 1 to 10, 76% chose to save the pedestrians over themselves. Study 3 is where it starts to get a little interesting, because they then asked the participants to imagine a family member was negatively affected in the vehicle with them. The morality of sacrifice was still rated above the midpoint and stayed consistent with the previous surveys, but they also asked how likely they would be to purchase a self-driving car programmed to minimize casualties or to prioritize protecting the passenger. Participants agreed that minimizing casualties was the moral thing to do, but when asked about their purchase option, they preferred the option of purchasing a car that would protect them. Or was a little bit different in the aspect that it asked people to rate algorithms that would have a certain outcome. So they asked how comfortable the people were with a car programmed that way, and how likely it would be to buy a car programmed that way. So they were given the situation of where the car would swerve to save 10 people when it killed the passenger, or when it would swerve into a pedestrian to save its passenger. And then there were also, the interesting point is that the higher moral algorithms were given high marks, but participants were also less likely to purchase cars that were programmed that way. The authors looked at the moral obligations being legally enforced. So while people often think that the car should be moral or behave in a manner that they deem to be moral, agreement was well below the midpoint even when faced with the dilemma of saving 10 but killing the passenger. So people did not like the idea of it being legally enforced. They wanted it to be kicked back to the manufacturer. Now, study 6 also went into a similar category. Likelihood to purchase cars with an algorithm regulated by the government. Only around 10 to 12% thought it was okay to regulate, even when it only killed one passenger and saved 10. Manufacturers will adapt to its customer base. Partially, probably why we've already seen Mercedes come out and say that they will always choose to protect the passenger of the vehicle rather than bystanders or attempting to minimize casualties. So while I feel there's no doubt that we will see self-driving cars in the near future, especially with all the plans being announced and kind of the hype around them, especially with Tesla being a huge driving force and then also the work that Google is doing. Also, I think there's more things that can be discussed but in addition to the moral dilemma, there's also the economic impact of the reduction of accidents and the ecosystem that exists around that. Also, local governments that depend on tickets to fund public projects and public goods, how will they be affected if tickets were to fall significantly because there's not someone controlling the car, so the car is less likely to violate laws. There's also some legality being discussed around self-driving cars. In the case of an accident, who is responsible? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the person driving the car? So there's a number of details that still need to be worked out, but I still feel like the moral one is still probably the most pressing and for me the most fascinating. Hope you guys enjoyed my video. Have a great day.